Nobody believed it at first, because when the news started spreading, it sounded too extreme, too final, too unbelievable to be real. But then, more details started coming out, and suddenly, people weren't laughing anymore, they were stunned. Because according to multiple sources, Demani, T.I.'s son, has been sentenced, and not just any sentence. A decision so serious, people are already calling it goodbye forever. Now pause. Because if that phrase is even close to accurate, then this isn't just another headline. This is life-changing, family-breaking, and potentially something that could alter everything we thought we knew about Domani. Because let's be real for a second. Domani has always been seen differently. More focused, more grounded, less caught up in the chaos compared to others around him. Yeah, so how did things go from that to this? That's the question nobody can answer right now. Because insiders are saying this situation didn't just happen overnight. There were signs, warnings, moments that people ignored until it was too late. And here's where it gets even more shocking. Because sources claim that when the decision was announced, the reaction inside the room wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was silent, heavy, like everyone knew something irreversible had just happened. And T.I., according to those who were there, he didn't speak immediately, he just sat there, processing, because whatever this sentence means, it's not small, it's not temporary, it's something that could change everything moving forward. And now the internet is trying to figure it out. What happened? What led to this? And why are people saying this might be the last time we see Demani the same way again? Because if even half of what's being whispered is true, then this situation is way deeper than anyone expected. And trust me, when we break down what actually led to this moment, you're going to realize this didn't come out of nowhere. Now, before we get into what actually happened, you need to understand who Demani really is. Because this situation, it doesn't make sense unless you know that. And that's exactly why people are so shocked right now. Because out of all of T.I.'s children, Demani has always been seen as the one who moved differently. Not loud, not reckless, not chasing attention. He stayed low, focused on music, focused on growth, focused on building something that didn't rely on his father's name. And that's what made people respect him. Because in a world where everyone is trying to go viral, Demani was trying to go real. But here's the part people didn't see. Because behind that calm image, there were pressures, expectations, the kind that don't get talked about publicly. Because when you carry a name like T.I.'s, you don't just represent yourself, you represent a legacy. And that pressure, it builds. Slowly. Quietly. Until one moment, it shows. Now, according to sources close to the situation, there were signs leading up to this. Subtle ones at first. Changes in behavior, less public activity, more distance. Moments where people around him noticed something was off, but couldn't quite explain it, and at the time, nobody thought it meant anything serious because Demani wasn't known for drama. He wasn't the one making headlines. He wasn't the one people were worried about. But sometimes, that's exactly why things go unnoticed. Because when someone is quiet, people assume everything is fine, even when it's not. And that's where this story starts to take a turn. Because according to insiders, there was an incident, not public, not viral, but serious enough to trigger attention behind the scenes. Now, details about that incident? Still unclear. Conflicting reports? Different versions. But everyone is saying the same thing. That moment changed everything. Because from that point on, things started moving differently. Faster, more serious, more controlled. Because once something crosses into legal territory, it doesn't stay quiet for long. And that's exactly what happened here. Because after that alleged incident, there were steps taken, investigations, discussions, processes that don't show up on social media, but happen anyway. And that's when the situation started shifting from personal to legal. Now here's the part that makes this even more intense. Because according to one source, T.I. knew not everything, but enough to understand that something serious was unfolding. And that's why, reportedly, he tried to step in early, tried to handle things before they escalated, before they reached a point where control would be lost. But here's the reality. Once something enters that system, control becomes limited. And that's exactly what makes this so dangerous. Because no matter who you are, no matter your influence, some situations move on their own. And this one apparently did. Yeah, because by the time things became official, by the time the case reached a point where decisions were being made, it was already too far in, too serious, too locked in, and that's when the court date was set. Now, at first, it didn't attract attention. No headlines, no viral posts. Just another legal process happening quietly in the background. But insiders, they knew, because they understood one thing. This wasn't going to be minor. This wasn't going to be quick, and this wasn't going to end quietly, and that's exactly why tension started building. Because once that date got closer, the pressure increased. For Demani, for T.I., for everyone connected to the situation, because nobody knew exactly how it was going to play out. But everyone knew it wasn't going to be good. And that brings us to the moment everything changed. Because when that hearing finally happened, when Domani stood there, when the decision was about to be announced, there was one thing in the room that everyone could feel. Uncertainty. Because up until that point, there was still hope. Hope that things wouldn't go too far. Hope that whatever happened could still be contained. But the moment that sentence was about to be delivered, that hope started to disappear. And what came next is where this story goes from shocking to completely unbelievable. And what makes this moment even harder to process is how quickly everything seemed to move once it reached that stage. Because according to insiders, once the case crossed into the courtroom, there was no more slowing it down, no more quiet handling, no more behind-the-scenes adjustments. Everything became official, structured, and completely out of anyone's personal control. And that's what people don't realize about situations like this. Once you're in that system, every move matters, every detail is examined, every action has consequences. And for Demani, that pressure was building with every step. Because while the public still didn't fully know what was going on, inside that process, things were getting serious, fast. Now, sources are saying that leading up to the hearing, there were moments where it felt like things could still go either way. Moments where outcomes were being considered, where different possibilities were still on the table. But at the same time, there was a growing sense that something wasn't adding up. Because according to one insider, there were complications. Details that didn't align perfectly, questions that didn't have clear answers. And when situations get complicated like that, they don't get easier. They get worse. Because the more unclear things are, the more serious the outcome can become. And that's exactly what started happening here. Because as the hearing approached, the tone shifted from uncertainty to tension, from possibility to reality. And Demani, he was right in the middle of it. Now witnesses are saying that on the day of the hearing, the energy in that room was different, heavy, quiet, like everyone already knew. This wasn't going to end well, because even before anything was said, before any decision was announced, you could feel it that something was about to happen. That couldn't be undone. And that's when T.I.'s presence became even more noticeable. Because according to people who were there, he wasn't speaking much, but he wasn't reacting outwardly. He was watching, focused, trying to process everything as it unfolded in real time. Because no matter how much you prepare for a moment like that, when it actually happens, it hits differently. And that's exactly what people are describing. Because when the hearing began, there was no drama, no long speeches, no drawn-out explanations. Just a process. a serious one, moving step by step toward a final decision. And the closer it got to that moment, the quieter the room became. Because everyone knew. Once those words were said, there was no taking them back, and then it happened. The sentence was delivered. Now, here's the part that people can't stop talking about. Because according to multiple accounts, the reaction wasn't what you'd expect. No shouting, no chaos, no immediate outburst, just silence. A deep, heavy silence that filled the room. Because whatever was said, whatever that sentence meant, it hit hard. And that's when people started realizing this wasn't temporary. This wasn't something that would just pass. This was serious. And the phrase people are now repeating? Goodbye forever. Now, whether that's literal or exaggerated, nobody knows for sure yet. But the fact that people are even saying it, that tells you everything about how heavy this moment felt. Because when situations reach that level, it's not just about the decision. It's about what that decision represents, the impact, the consequences, the changes that come with it. And for Demani, this moment might have changed everything, but here's where things get even more intense. Because as people began processing what had just happened, details started leaking. Small ones at first, but enough to raise even more questions. Because now the focus isn't just on the sentence, it's on what led to it. Because whatever happened, whatever brought Demani to that point, it wasn't random, it wasn't sudden. It was something that built up over time. And that's exactly what people are trying to understand right now. What really happened behind the scenes? What triggered this entire situation? And why did it reach a point this serious? Because if even part of what's being hinted at is true, then this story is far from simple. In fact, it might be one of the most unexpected turns anyone has seen involving TY's family. And trust me, when we get into what actually caused this situation to escalate, you're going to realize this didn't just happen. It was building all along. And what actually led to Demani being in that courtroom? This is where the story starts getting complicated. Because depending on who you ask, you'll hear a completely different version. Some sources are saying this all started from a situation that was supposed to stay private. A misunderstanding that escalated way further than anyone expected. Others? They're claiming this wasn't sudden at all. That there were already tensions building behind the scenes. Situations that never made it to the public. Until now. And that's exactly what makes this so confusing. Because right now, there isn't just one story. There are multiple, and they don't all line up. But here's what keeps coming up again and again. According to several online reports, there was an incident, not fully explained, not clearly confirmed, but serious enough to bring attention. And once that attention hit, everything started moving fast, because when something crosses from private into legal territory, things change immediately. Now here's where it gets even more intense. Because one version of the story claims that the situation involved people around Domani, not just him directly, which raises a big question. Was he the center of it? Or did he get pulled into something bigger than himself? And that's exactly what people are debating right now. Because if he was pulled into it, that changes how you look at everything. But if he wasn't, then this becomes something completely different. And here's the twist that made things even more confusing. Because just before the hearing, a post started circulating. Now nobody knows who posted it originally, but it spread fast. Also, and what it said caught everyone's attention. Not everything being said is the full story. Wait before judging. Now think about that, because that sounds like someone who knows more than they're saying. Someone trying to slow things down before the truth gets completely twisted. But the internet didn't slow down. It did the opposite. Because the moment that post started spreading, people started digging, looking for clues, trying to piece together what actually happened. And the more they looked, the more confusing it got. Because for every detail that surfaced, another one contradicted it. Different timelines, different explanations, different versions of the same moment. And that's when things started to feel off. Because when stories don't line up, it usually means one of two things. People don't know the full truth, or the truth is being kept quiet. And right now, it feels like both. But here's where the situation took a serious turn. Because when Domani finally appeared in court, the tone changed completely. Because this wasn't speculation anymore. This wasn't just internet talk. This was real, a real moment with real consequences. And according to people who were there, the atmosphere, heavy, quiet, tense, like everyone knew this wasn't going to be simple. But here's the first major twist. Because according to one insider, the hearing didn't go the way people expected. Not at all. Because instead of things being straightforward, there were moments of confusion, details being questioned, things being brought up that nobody outside the room even knew about. And that's what shocked people the most, because it suggests something deeper, something that hasn't been fully revealed yet. And just when it felt like things couldn't get more uncertain, the decision came. And the reaction? That's what has everyone talking. Because instead of chaos, instead of loud reactions, there was silence. And that silence? It's what made people start asking what really happened in that room. What was actually said that we don't know yet? Because whatever it was, it clearly hit different. But just when people thought they understood the situation, they didn't. Because what came out next completely changed how people are looking at the story. And what came out next? This is where everything got even more confusing and way more intense. Because just hours after that courtroom moment, a new version of events started circulating. And this one didn't just add details, it had contradicted everything people thought they knew. Because according to this version, the situation wasn't as straightforward as it was being made out to be. In fact, it suggested that key details might be missing from the public narrative. Now pause, because that changes everything. Because if the full story isn't out yet, then what people are reacting to right now might only be half of what actually happened. And that's exactly why this next twist hit so hard. Because a source, while some, again, unconfirmed but spreading fast, claimed that during the hearing, there was a moment, a very specific moment, where something unexpected was brought up. Not part of the original focus, not something people were even talking about online, but something serious enough to shift the tone inside that room. Now, nobody knows exactly what that detail was, but people describing the moment are all saying the same thing. That's when everything changed. And here's where it gets even more intense. Because according to that same source, that moment is what led to the outcome people are reacting to now. Not just the situation itself, but what came out during the process. And that raises a huge question. What was revealed in that room that the public hasn't heard yet? Because if there's something missing, something that hasn't been explained, then this story is far from complete. But just when people were trying to process that, another twist hit, and this one nobody was ready for. Because a second post started circulating, allegedly from someone connected to the situation, and what it said completely flipped the narrative. Again, people keep talking like it's over. It's not. Now think about that. Because if that's true, then what we just saw wasn't the end. It was just one part of something bigger. And suddenly, the phrase goodbye forever started feeling different. Because now people are asking, is this actually final? Or is there more coming that could change everything? And that uncertainty, that's what's driving this situation right now. Because nobody knows what's real. Nobody knows what's missing. And nobody knows what's about to happen next. But here's the part that made everything even more intense. Because while all of this was happening online, T.I. still hadn't said anything publicly. No statement, no reaction, no explanation. And that silence? At this point, it's not just noticeable, it's suspicious. Because when something this big happens, people expect a response, especially from someone like T.I., but instead, nothing. And that's what has people talking. Because now it feels like either he's waiting for the right moment, or there's something he can't speak on yet. And both of those possibilities, they're heavy. But just when it felt like the situation couldn't get more uncertain, it did, because a new detail just surfaced. And this one doesn't just raise questions, it raises serious doubts about everything we've heard so far. And that new detail? This is where everything starts to fall apart. Because just when people thought they had at least some idea of what was going on, a completely different narrative surfaced. And this one didn't just add confusion, it challenged the entire story. Because according to multiple posts now circulating, the situation involving Demani might not be what people think it is at all. Not fully, not completely. And possibly not even accurately being reported. Now pause for a second. Because if that's true, then everything we've been reacting to might be based on incomplete information. And that's exactly what people started realizing. Because a new wave of commentary began spreading. With one key idea, something is missing from this story. And the more people started looking into it, the more that idea made sense. Because certain details just weren't lining up. Timelines felt off. Descriptions didn't fully match. And for a situation this serious, that kind of inconsistency raises red flags. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because a breakdown video dropped, and this one didn't just react. It analyzed everything, step by step. And according to that breakdown, the biggest issue isn't what's being said, it's what's not being said. Because the video pointed out something crucial. There's no clear, confirmed explanation of what actually led to the hearing. Now think about that. Because for something this big, that's unusual. Very unusual. Because normally, details leak, information spreads. But here, it's different. It's vague, controlled. Almost like certain parts of the story are being held back. And that's exactly what made people uneasy. Because now it feels like we're seeing reactions, but not the full cause. We're hearing outcomes, but not the full explanation. And that gap, that's where speculation grows. But just when people thought things couldn't get more confusing, the shocking reveal dropped. Because during that same breakdown, a claim was made that changed everything. The claim? Domani might not be the central issue. Now pause. Because that flips everything. Because if he's not the main focus, then why is his name at the center of the story? And that's where things get even deeper. Because according to this theory, he may have been connected to a situation involving others. Something bigger? Something that brought his name into the spotlight, even if he wasn't the only one involved. Now again, nothing confirmed, but the idea? It spread fast. Because it makes sense of one thing people couldn't explain before. Why the details are so unclear, why the narrative feels incomplete, why everything seems so controlled. And that's exactly why this situation is starting to feel bigger than it first appeared. Because now it's not just about one person. It might be about a situation involving multiple people, multiple perspectives, and possibly details that haven't been made public yet. But just when people started leaning into that theory, something else happened. And this one made everything even more intense. Because out of nowhere, a short clip surfaced, and while it didn't show anything directly related to the case, it showed Demani. After everything, and his demeanor, that's what caught attention. Because instead of looking broken, instead of looking defeated, he looked calm, focused, almost like someone who knows something others don't. And that reaction, that's what made people pause. Because if the situation was as final as people are saying, Why doesn't he look like it? And that question? That's what's driving the conversation right now. Because now people aren't just asking what happened. They're asking, what do we not know yet? And trust me, based on what's about to come out next, we're still missing a huge piece of this story. And that missing piece? This is where everything takes a turn nobody expected. Because just when people were starting to question the entire narrative, a new claim surfaced, and this one didn't just add information, it changed the direction completely. Yeah, because according to multiple sources now being shared online, the situation involving Demani might still be in progress. Not finished, not finalized, still moving. Now stop. Because if that's true, then everything people are saying right now, goodbye forever. It's over. It's done. Might be completely premature. And that's exactly what's making this so intense. Because now we're dealing with two completely different realities. One where everything is final, one where things are still unfolding, and right now, nobody knows which one is real. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Because a post started circulating from someone claiming to have legal insight into the situation. And what they said, it caught everyone's attention. People are reacting to a moment, not the full process. Now that line, that's powerful. Because it suggests that what we saw, what people are calling the sentence, might not be the full story. It might just be one stage in something bigger. And if that's true, then this situation could still change, shift, evolve. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Because right after that idea started gaining traction, another detail surfaced, and this one raised even more questions. Because according to a separate source, there may have been conditions attached to the outcome. Now again, not confirmed, but spreading fast. Because if there are conditions, that means flexibility. That means possibility. That means this situation might not be as permanent as people think. And that's exactly why the narrative is starting to flip again. Because now people are asking, was this really a final decision? Or was it something more complex behind the scenes? And that uncertainty? That's what's driving everything right now. But here's where things get even more intense. Because while all of this is happening online, something changed in real life. Because according to people watching closely, Domani hasn't disappeared. He hasn't gone silent. He hasn't completely stepped away. Instead, he's been seen, quietly, moving differently, but not gone. And that alone, it contradicts the idea that everything is over. And that's exactly why people are questioning everything again. Because if the situation was truly final, would we be seeing this? Would things feel this unclear? Would there be this many unanswered questions? Probably not. And that's why this next part is so important. Because just when it felt like things might start settling, they didn't. Because a wave of reactions just hit. And this time, the entire conversation shifted in a way nobody expected. And the moment this new angle started spreading, the entire conversation flipped again. Because now people weren't just reacting emotionally. They started questioning everything they had already believed. Because if this situation is still unfolding, then why are people calling it final? If there are conditions, then why is everyone acting like it's over? And just like that, the internet split into completely different sides. You had one group saying, y'all jumped to conclusions too fast. This isn't finished. Another group firing back, no, something serious definitely happened. Naka, they're just not telling us everything. And then there was a third group, the loudest one right now, saying, we're missing the real story completely. Now that idea, that's what's taking over. Because the more people look at this situation, the more it feels like there's a gap, a missing piece, something that hasn't been explained yet. And that's exactly why industry voices started stepping in. Because when things get this unclear, people with experience start noticing patterns. And one industry insider dropped a line that instantly went viral. When details don't come out clearly, it usually means they can't. Now think about that, because that doesn't just suggest confusion, that suggests limitation. Like there are reasons certain things aren't being said. And that's what made people pause. Because now it feels like this isn't just about what happened. It's about what can't be revealed yet. And that possibility, that's heavy. But it didn't stop there, because another voice jumped in. And this one took a completely different angle. They said, people keep saying goodbye forever, but nobody has confirmed what that even means. Now that hit hard, because it exposed something important. The phrase itself might be exaggerated, and if that's true, then the entire emotional reaction might be based on interpretation, not facts. And that's exactly why the conversation is getting even more intense, because now people are asking, who started that narrative? Why did it spread so fast? And what does it actually mean? Because words matter, especially in situations like this. And right now, those words are driving the entire reaction. But here's where things get even more divided. Because some people are still focused on one thing. Something serious did happen. And they're not backing down from that. Because even if the full story isn't clear, even if details are missing, the fact that this situation reached this level, that alone says a lot. And that's why the debate is getting louder, more intense, more divided than ever. Because now it's not just about Demani, it's about perception, narrative, and who's controlling what people believe. And right in the middle of all that, silence. From Domani, from TI, from anyone who could actually clarify what's going on. And that silence, it's doing two things at once. Making some people think it's not as serious, making others think it's even more serious. And that contradiction, that's what's fueling everything. Because now, no matter what side you're on, there's one thing everyone agrees on. We don't have the full story. And until that changes, this situation isn't going anywhere. But just when it felt like the conversation couldn't get more intense, it did. Because a new reaction just dropped. And this one, it's forcing people to rethink everything again. And that new reaction, this is where everything got even more uncomfortable. Because it didn't come from a random account. It came from someone who's been around situations like this before. Someone who understands how these things really play out behind the scenes. And what they said? Well, it didn't hype anything up. It didn't pick sides. It just dropped a reality check. Y'all reacting to headlines, not the process. Now that line, it hit different. Because it exposed something nobody wanted to admit. That most people aren't reacting to facts. They're reacting to how things sound. And right now, things sound extreme. Sentenced. Goodbye forever. Words like that, they trigger emotion. They make people jump to conclusions. And that's exactly what's happening here. But here's where it gets even deeper. Because another voice stepped in. And this one took it even further. They said, if this was really what people think it is, you wouldn't be seeing what you're seeing right now. Now, pause. Because that line, that's not random. That's pointing to something specific. The fact that Demani is still being seen. The fact that things aren't fully locked down publicly. The fact that there's still movement, and that suggests one thing. This situation might not be as final as it's being made out to be. And just like that, the narrative flipped again. Because now people are asking, are we overreacting, or are we just missing key details? And that's exactly why the conversation is getting more intense. Because both sides feel like they're right, but neither side has full confirmation. And that's what makes this so unpredictable. But here's the twist nobody saw coming. Because while all of this is happening online, a new detail surfaced. And this one, it didn't come from a post. It didn't come from a rumor. It came from observation. Because people started noticing something. Something subtle, but important. Because despite everything being said, despite all the noise, despite all the headlines, Demani hasn't reacted publicly in the way people expected. No emotional breakdown, no dramatic posts, no public defense, nothing. And that silence? At this point, it feels intentional. Like someone who knows something others don't. Like someone who isn't panicking. Because they understand the situation better than the public does. And that possibility? That's what's making people uncomfortable. Because now the question isn't just, what happened? It's, what does he know that we don't? And that's exactly why this situation is still evolving. Because until that gap is filled, until the missing piece comes out, nothing feels complete. Nothing feels confirmed. And everything feels like it could change at any moment. But here's the part you really need to pay attention to. Because just when it felt like things might finally slow down, they didn't. Because a final detail just surfaced. And this one? It doesn't just add to the story, it flips it one last time. And that final detail? This is where everything changes. Because just when people thought they were close to understanding what's going on, a new claim surfaced. And this one didn't just challenge the story, it flipped it completely because according to multiple sources now being shared, the phrase sentenced that's been going viral might not mean what people think it means. Now pause. Because that's huge, because if that word is being misinterpreted, then the entire emotional reaction might be based on the wrong understanding. And that's exactly what this new detail is suggesting. Because according to this perspective, what happened in that courtroom may have been part of a process, not a final outcome. Meaning, not the end. Not permanent. Not goodbye forever. And suddenly, everything starts to feel different. Because if that's true, then the biggest narrative driving this entire situation might be wrong. But here's where it gets even more intense. Because right after that idea started spreading, another line surfaced. And this one has everyone talking. This wasn't the final step. It was the first one people noticed. Now think about that. Because if this is just the beginning, then what comes next? Because that suggests more developments, more updates, more details that haven't been revealed yet. And that's exactly why tension is rising again. Because now people aren't just looking back at what happened, they're looking forward, trying to figure out what's about to happen next. But here's the twist that nobody was ready for. Because just as this narrative started gaining traction, something changed. Quietly, subtly, but enough for people to notice. Because Domani's presence shifted. Not gone, not disappeared, but different. Less visible, less active, more controlled. And that alone raised even more questions. Because if everything was normal, why the change? And if everything was serious, why not complete silence, that middle ground? That's what's confusing people the most, because it suggests something in between. Something that hasn't been fully explained. And that's exactly why this final detail matters so much. Because it leaves us with one unavoidable question. Are we witnessing the end of something? Or the beginning of something much bigger? Because right now, nothing feels complete. Nothing feels final. And everything feels like it could shift again at any moment. And that's what makes this so unpredictable. Because until the full story comes out, until every detail is clear, until someone finally breaks the silence, this situation will stay exactly where it is right now. Unresolved, unclear, and sitting on edge. Because whatever really happened behind the scenes, whatever led to that courtroom moment, whatever this sentence actually means, one thing is certain, we still don't have the full truth. And when that truth finally comes out, it might not just change how we see the situation. It might change everything. Now, after everything we just broke down, I need you to really think about this. Because this situation, it's not as clear as people are making it seem. So let me ask you directly. Drop your opinion in the comments right now. Do you think Demani was actually facing something serious? Or is this whole situation being exaggerated by the internet? That phrase, goodbye forever. Do you think it's real, or just something people ran with without knowing the full truth? And most importantly, do you believe we're seeing the end of this story? Or just the beginning? Because right now, the internet is completely divided. And your opinion might be the one that actually makes sense of all this confusion. So don't stay silent. I'm reading everything. Now, if you want more deep breakdowns like this, hit that like button. Because the more this video spreads, the more we can uncover what's really going on behind the scenes. And trust me, there's always more than what people show you. Also, if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Because if any new details drop, if someone finally speaks out, if this situation flips again, we're covering it first. No delays, no missed updates. Just straight breakdowns of everything happening in real time. And something tells me this story, it's not done yet. So stay locked in, stay ready, and keep watching closely. Because the next update might change everything all over again.